Something about this train of thought rubs me the wrong way. Which is why I wanted to go out there and make a YouTube video about this topic and respond to a piece that we saw on HabsFanatics.com in the process. Because today we are heading over to one of the latest pieces published earlier this morning by Elias Edem on Habs Fanatics. It talks about a particular trade that Kent Hughes made that is dubbed here as a nightmare. Okay, what are they referring to? Well, from the title, from the thumbnail, you might not get it right away. And that's because I'm very intentional about the way I like to phrase things. It's called a tease in the business, kids. I did go to radio school, so I kinda take pride in the way that I'm able to use this knowledge. But today we are heading over to Chicago and talking about a young prospect turned rookie who is just getting his first cup of coffee with the team in a very intriguing way. And whether or not it was a nightmare, really, that Kent Hughes traded away the draft pick to take this player. Here's the article in question from Elias Edem. The Kirby Dach trade is turning into a nightmare, as the player drafted by the Hawks is shining. The article opens up by talking about Frank Nazar, how he is shining this season in the AHL, and he is a name worth noting for Canadiens fans. At only 20 years old, Frank Nazar already has 24 points including 11 goals in 20 games with the Blackhawks AHL affiliate. Remember, during the 2022 draft, Kent Hughes and the Canadiens traded Alexander Romanov and the 98th overall pick to the Islanders for the 13th overall pick, which they then combined with the 66th overall pick to acquire Kirby Dach. Now, before we dive into what the article goes out there and talks about, let's just go over the profile here. So Frank Nazar, or Frank Nazar III, is 20 years old out of Detroit, Michigan, USA, drafted in that 13th overall spot by the Chicago Blackhawks. 5'9", 174 right-handed forward. He's not really the biggest guy out there, but what Nazar has is pretty much everything you need out of anybody who is under 5'10". He makes subtle, almost imperceptible plays at every corner of the ice to create advantages for his line mates. Little things like dragging defenders toward him on entries to create half-ice 2-on-1s, or driving the net off the puck to give his line mates more runway. The more attention you pay to Nazar, the more you appreciate his offensive genius. And the Elite Prospects 2022 Draft Guide went out there and compared Frank Nazar to Brayden Point, which is a really nice comparison for anybody who is under 6 feet. He was ranked really highly in passing, hockey sense, puck handling, and skating. The quote here from a Western Conference executive in 2022 says, "You don't have to be big to be good anymore, and size shouldn't trump skill. You take the best player with the highest ceiling, and he is most certainly in the top 20 for this class by that measurement." Nazar was drafted 13th overall because he had a 70-point campaign in 56 games played, a very good marker for a 2022 draft eligible who eventually found himself in the NCAA with the University of Michigan Wolverines. Now, due to health complications, he did not play for most of the season after, only having 7 points in 13 games. But in 2023-2024, his first full NCAA year, Frank Nazar had 41 points in 41 games played as a 19-year-old. A very good point production metric. He made the World Junior team, was over a point per game over there, he made the Chicago Blackhawks towards the end of the year, and he had scored his first NHL goal during his first game during the first period. It was a pretty good storybook moment. This season, as the article went out there and spoke about, Frank Nazar has 24 points in 21 games with the Rockford IceHogs. Honestly, that's pretty incredible production for a guy who's only 20 years old to be already over a point per game in the AHL. He has had a cup of coffee with the Blackhawks the past 2 games here against New Jersey and the Islanders, but he has yet to score a point in the 2024-2025 NHL regular season. In fact, it's actually been 5 games played for Nazar without a point, considering the previous 3 games he had in Rockford also saw him get 0 points. He had a really strong stint before that. You can take a look at this over here. Spanning back over to the early November period of the season, Frank Nazar had, 20 points in 13 games played? I totally didn't just pause the commentary on the audio so I could count it up manually, but he had an incredible stint before going pointless in 3 games straight. So you could say at one point he was over a point per game by a pretty significant margin at 24 points in 18 games. So Frank Nazar has certainly found himself in a pretty good spot in the Chicago Blackhawks organization. This article then goes out there and talks about how, with Frank Nazar and his impressive play, Kirby Dach also having a disappointing season, this is really difficult for Montreal because Dach's 9 points in 30 games make it a big struggle to justify the investment made by the Habs. And here it is. I mean, with the Blackhawks, Nazar already seems to be positioning himself as a future star. His potential chemistry with Connor Bedard hints at a formidable duo that could dominate the National Hockey League for years to come. For Montreal, this scenario highlights the importance of Dach getting back to his level and contributing more to the team's success. And so, even though this article does go out there and say, oh, this was a nightmare scenario for the Canadiens, I do think that is a little bit hyperbolic. I mean, look, as somebody who makes YouTube videos for a living and uses a lot of hyperbole in the titles and thumbnails, I know hyperbole when I see it, and this is definitely that. Firstly, you can't even guarantee that had the Montreal Canadiens kept that 13th overall pick for themselves, they would have taken Frank Nazar in the first place. And secondly, this is a totally different comparison between what you're seeing out of a player today in Kirby Dach and what you're projecting in a player in the future in Frank Nazar. It's hard to really do that, in my opinion, because if you want to say, oh yeah, Frank Nazar's going to be so good in the future, you could say the same thing about Dach. The only difference is, right now, Nazar is doing fantastically in the AHL, Dach's doing pretty poorly in the NHL. At the end of the day, NHL versus AHL, still good to see a guy doing something, at least, at the NHL level, over somebody who is doing very, very well in the A. And I get that's a stupid comparison because it's like, yeah, well, Frank Nazar is 3-4 years younger than Kirby Dach, and he's over a point per game. He's looking so good. At least he's looking good comparative to where he is. Kirby Dach is looking pretty bad, and it sucks because we recognize that he has been better than what he is showing off before. Nazar's just getting better and better. But again, you know, you go back to that main idea, it's difficult to really justify any sort of a conclusion because who knew if Montreal would have been able to take a guy like Nazar in that spot? Maybe they take Rutger McGroarty, maybe they take Jonathan Lekkerimäki, maybe Ivan Miroshnichenko, maybe they take Philip Mashar in the 13th overall spot, like 13 picks earlier compared to where they actually took him at 26th. Things could be very different with Montreal. And also, I think it's pretty well documented at this point that part of the reason that trade even got done was because Montreal was targeting Kirby Dach the entire time. It's hard to think about it like Nazar for Dach, when really the top player that Montreal sent away in this series of moves was Alexander Romanov. If Kent Hughes had his way, which he did, it would have been Romanov for Dach, not necessarily Frank Nazar for Dach. Or even the draft pick, to be fair. It's just, they had to add on some extra stuff, they had to make this trade with the Islanders for it to go through, they had to do everything all simultaneously, and as a result, we had ourselves a pretty nutty announcement in the 2022 draft that saw both trades get broken at the same time. So that's kind of my memory of everything that happened. It's hard to think about it as Frank Nazar being a nightmare situation scenario for Montreal because there was never really any inkling to have this guy, or even the pick that was used to draft him, as a part of the team. It was always going to be Romanov for Dach. They wanted to get those younger dudes that had already had NHL experience, and that is exactly what they did in 2022 by acquiring Kirby, who unfortunately is struggling today with the Montreal Canadiens. So I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you think this really is some sort of a nightmare scenario, quote-unquote, a nightmare trade for Kent Hughes? I wanted to make this video commentary responding and reacting to that sentiment, so you can let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Chicago Blackhawks fans, what are you seeing out of Frank Nazar so far? I know he's gotten himself 0 points thus far. However, he has been very good in the American Hockey League, and he did score a first NHL goal for the ages back in the 23-24 season. So what are your thoughts on what you're seeing out of Nazar so far? Do you have any advice for Canadiens fans that are all upset and a little bit pissed off with Kirby Dach's play? Thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Sign on, and bye.